Hello everybody, my name is Mara Floss. I'm here for the Rural Cafe. Today we will talk about the medical education and the rural track. And I think this will be a rural track and medical education, and this will be a good hangout. We have a lot of people, so to be a busy one. And I'm from Brazil. I'm a 50-year medical student, and I just ask for each one of you present yourself, and then we start. You can also follow us on Twitter with the hashtag Rural Cafe and on our page on Facebook. So if you would like to ask something or leave your comments, please go ahead. So Veronica, can you start?
Hi, my name is Veronica. I'm a family medicine trainee from Croatia, and today I'll be facilitating our Twitter chat, so please use the Rural Cafe hashtag, and I look forward to your questions and comments.
Steve?
Hi everyone, my name is Stijntje. I'm a medical student from the Netherlands and I'm here as the International Federation for Medical Students Associations.
Sophie?
Hi, my name is Sophie. I'm a third-year medical student from Swansea and I'm a colleague of Amber's.
Josu?
Hi, I'm Jozo Schmuch. I am, same as Steve, from the International Federation of Medical Students Association, or IFMSA. I am Director of Public Health, and I'm really looking forward to discussing rural health with you.
Dave?
Hi folks, my name is David Hogg. I'm a rural GP on the Isle of Arran, Scotland, and as I mentioned before, I'm on call tonight, so if I disappear, I'm not walking out, it's just I have to attend to something, but I hope to be here for the full duration. Thanks for that.
Amber?
Hello, I'm Amber. I'm a third-year medical student at Swansea University, and I'm also a part of the Rural and Remote Health and Medical Education track along with Sophie.
And Bianca?
Hello guys, my name is Bianca. I'm from Brazil as Mayara. I'm a fourth-year medical student. That's it.
I think Bianca is a little bit in trouble. Well, today we have this difficult dam. I'm not sure if it's difficult, but at least we have a lot of things to talk. I'm happy to say that we are we are more medical students interested in rural here, so I think it will be a great discussion. So I would like to ask you first if anyone would like to talk anything about your experience as a rural student or someone that is interested or more experienced one. And so what do you think about your rural medical education or about the medical education, the rural track? Anyone would like to start?
Yeah, I can start if you want. Yeah, so yeah, we've been really interested in this in Scotland because we know it's very clear that attracting medical students and allowing them to experience rural practice is a vital step in creating that kind of idea about a notion that they might want to practice in rural practice longer term as a career. But we've also been interested in some research and some work out in Australia which highlights the importance that it's not just about that. This is about a pipeline approach and looking at different entry points that people can become interested in rural practice. So it's kind of merging this idea that in inspiring students into thinking about rural practice is an absolutely vital part of recruitment and retention. But we need to be sort of tying that up with the whole sort of pipeline. We've actually been looking at yet, but looking, maybe not research, but looking at the numbers of what actually happens to the students who do experience rural practice. My personal experience is that I went up to Stornoway, the Western Isles in Scotland, as a fourth-year medical student, in fact a fifth-year medical student, and that was my first experience of rural practice in Scotland. And that's what inspired me to think about this as a career. So it certainly worked for me, and then I was able to scout out other options to continue that. But we're also trying to get a bit more savvy here about what other things are important to allow people to continue in that kind of career aspiration, and that this kind of pipeline approach about looking at all the subsequent stages of allowing our career aspirations is really important. Lots of work going on here in Scotland to look at this. Just now we have a strong undergraduate programme, particularly in 2 or 3 of our universities in Scotland. But yeah, very delighted to kind of be part of this discussion and also learn from other countries about what's happening. I think it's vital that we have a strong rural presence in the undergraduate curriculum. I suspect that most undergraduate curriculums have lots of scope to increase that exposure to rural practice, and also to realise some of the benefits of generalism. Generalism being a really good, inspiring and fun, stimulating kind of form of practice where you're not super specialist too soon. So yeah, there's loads of positive things kind of coming through that at the moment. But yeah, obviously keen to hear what other people's experience is as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure if anyone would like to talk. Please just say something. I just talk a little bit about Brazil also. Actually, I will talk about a little bit about me. I did my fellow by Science Without Borders in Ireland, and then in Ireland I have the chance to experience with a rural doctor, the rural medicine, and I got mesmerized. So I didn't have a lot of contact on my university course. We are not so ahead as Scotland. We are just starting to have the rural medicine incorporated on the curriculum. So it will be a long way, but we are trying to talk more and get students connected here in Brazil and all around the world also. I think, like I was reading, that we have a lot of people in the rural place, but we are not addressing rural in our education as a doctors and as a health professionals in a role. So I think it's one of the things that we need to start to talk more here in Brazil, and I think also in the world, as we are not addressing all the people. I'm not sure if anyone would like to talk more. Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, thank you. I absolutely agree with what David said, that if you as a medical student have not experienced working in the rural area or the issues that take their place there, you don't really have an idea of what you're getting into. And medical education sort of has this obligation to prepare medical students for what they will be facing in the future, which actually is a lot of problems that are happening in the rural area, which happen to be also the areas where there's not a lot of doctors going there. And exposure to rural areas does really encourage people to, in a later stage, actually start considering a career there. But there's different kinds of ways to deliver the curriculum, and like David said, the spiral curriculum of sort of giving people a hint of these different areas throughout the years, or elective-based approaches where medical students are actually encouraged to take on certain initiatives that are really to their own interest. One of the problems that we hear sometimes is that it's not per se medical students not being interested in the rural areas, but also when they go there, that they face a lot of challenges. A lot of our students within our networks have talked about the working conditions or the learning conditions there, that they don't feel that their universities support them enough, or when they do go and learn actually in a rural area, that there's not enough equipment available. How do they tackle that there? Or that they feel that their safety is in danger or anything. That doesn't take away that patients are also facing these problems. But there is also this sort of responsibility for medical schools to not only prepare medical students for what they will be facing later on, but also to guide them during the medical education when they are going there.
Sure. As Luis, could you introduce yourself? You just arrived, and then I comment on Steve. Is that okay?
Hi everyone. Sorry for being late. My name is Luis Costa. I'm a GP resident in Portugal in my third year, and I'm involved with the Vasco da Gama movement, the European network for new and future family physicians.
So Steve was just talking about the lack of conditions when you go to a rural elective or having a rural experience. I think this is part of a whole context as well. Like we have the intern, but the service is running without these structures, not just for the education part, but it's the whole context that we have lack conditions on rural, I think, in general. I'm not sure if anyone would like to comment.
I don't mind saying something.
Yeah. Go, Amber. Yeah.
I was going to say the reason why I chose Swansea University, aside from the fact that they did have a focus on rural medicine as well as urban medicine, is because I'm originally from the British Virgin Islands, where we don't have a lot of resources, and probably it will be another 50 years before we have any resources. So like Stincha was saying about, students who go to a rural environment and they don't have the resources or the support. Unfortunately, that is the reality of what it's like to practice in a lot of rural and remote settings around the world. And the reason I decided to join the rural track at Swansea was because I needed to make sure that even though I have a European medical education, when I go back to the Caribbean, I still need to be able to function in that environment. So the lack of resources is almost itself a learning environment, because you have to learn how to be creative, and by living that kind of life, I think you understand what your patients go through a bit more. You understand what's feasible and what's a realistic outcome for their health, and then you become a better doctor through that. And I think that being part of the rural medical education track here is preparing me very early for having to cope with those challenges.
David, would like to comment? Okay.
Yeah, it's interesting points that are being raised there, and I think that there's lots of things. I think first of all, sometimes it's sometimes deemed that rural practice is a different form of medicine, that it's perhaps less relevant if someone is a budding orthopedic surgeon or obstetrician and gynecologist. And I think that in terms of medical education, the thing that rural practice can really offer undergraduate education is that just as you were saying there, coping with uncertainty, but also the value of core clinical skills. I was discussing this with some Glasgow medical students just recently, and I think sometimes if you're in a big hospital, now obviously we want to be modern practitioners, we want to make use of all the technology and all the science that we have developed in the labs and sort of in the radiology and all these kind of exciting departments, but there is this important aspect of understanding the core value of good clinical skills, and I think sometimes they are actually kind of surpassed. Sometimes they kind of pass by quickly. Why take someone's temperature when you can get a rapid CRP? Why check for someone's heart sounds when you can get a troponin or an echo? And I think that sometimes there are situations when that's perfectly valid, and there's no point holding up good, fast medical care for the sake of doing something. But the flip side is being able to use your core clinical skills, that thing around your neck as a stethoscope, and also your hands for examination, and to an even greater extent the value of good history taking. kind of making sure that you have it, that you build up this, you form your knowledge in the process of good examination, and then subsequent to that, investigation. I think rural practice has a huge amount to offer in terms of establishing and doing a lot to kind of highlight the benefits of good scientific practice in the art of diagnosis. And kind of negating some of the ease that we can just whiz people through MRI scanners or CT scanners, often unnecessarily, when good clinical skills can take a lot of that over. The other point I was just going to raise was that I think we're getting a bit more clever and understanding a bit more about how best to deliver that education. Here in Ireland, we take students from Dundee, Glasgow, and latterly King's College in London and University College London. So we see a variety of different sort of ways of that students have been learning. And what's very clear is that anything less than the sort of 8 weeks in rural practice, it's quite difficult to deliver a decent education over 4 or 5 weeks. We can do it, and we have been doing it, but those students who are here with us for just that little bit longer, and I wonder if anyone here has work that I think has initially come out of, it's Washington and so 3 states in America, which we're trying to emulate here as well, where students actually are based in a rural practice for a whole year, and they follow patient journeys, and the generalist nature means that they actually cover a lot of the curriculum through those kind of multiple contacts anyway. So just something else to bring in is about, yes, ideally it would be nice if all students had the opportunity if they wish to get, but the next question is how best do we actually kind of deliver that? What timescales and what resources are required to make sure that students have a good experience?
Jozo, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I would actually like to comment. I think you raised very valid points about the education of medical students in the clinical skills, and especially how those skills pertain to practicing in rural areas, and then disparities between urban and rural areas in terms of availability of resources, which is something I think is very important. However, I think a lot of time we forget about other education that people going in rural areas actually need. And one of them is in terms of public health, and how education in public health of medical students actually, an approach to public health differs from urban to rural area. Just to give you an example, if we look at the prevention programs from many countries in the world, they never reach a rural population. So I think it's also very important to develop within the medical students community a mindset, and between and in the rural student, even though students attending rural health or rural practices, it's very important to develop a sense of them being an important part of prevention and public health, in a way that they need to focus on prevention as well as treating people. So I think that's something to think about as well.
Anyone would like to comment? Until if someone would like to comment, I just would like to comment that my university is attached to a hospital. So we have like, it's total hospital oriented, and this is just so hard to manage, because I'm like 1 year, a whole year without any contact with any community, just hospital. So I think this is one of the things, and I have 2 questions. Like, do you think that coming from a rural background, it makes you come back to your rural place? And I just would like to ask also how we could create the awareness to other students, and how to bring them more close to rural context and talking about rural. Because like in Brazil, we are just starting to talk more about it. So what we can do. And I think Sophie would like to talk. I think, I'm not sure. And Jozo and David. So,
can I? I don't know if there is.
Yeah. And then Jozo and David after. You.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right. I just would like to do some comments. I don't remember if it was David or Jozo sorry if I don't say the name rightly. You were talking about the time during an internship. I don't know if it was David. Saying that sometimes you can do an internship where you can stay 1 year long and you can be along with your patients and see how they react to the treatment. And I think that this is really, really important, because just as Mayara said, my university also is attached to a hospital, and we have some clinical consultations, but they are isolated. We don't have a continuous treatment and a continuous relationship with the patient, and this is really, really bad. I'm sorry. When I introduced myself, my internet was not really good. Could you listen to me, or should I introduce myself again? You listen. You okay? Okay.
That's fine. Yeah, we listen. Yeah.
All right. All right. And okay. And we do. I haven't started my internship yet because I'm in the 4th year and it starts on the 5th. But I have heard from my colleagues that we do have some internship in family medicine, but they are really short, around 1 month maybe, and you have like 3 or 4 weeks to stay in one unit, so you cannot be along with the patients for a long time. So I think that this is really bad, because therefore students, they cannot have the idea of a continuous treatment, a continuous relationship with the patient. And this timing question, I think that David was talking about, and what Joso said, I believe it was about public health and about prevention, and I agree with him. And I think that another problem in medical education is that we still have that education based on disease. We have to learn about disease, and we have to learn about treatment, and we have to learn how to cure people, and we don't have education focused in prevention, how to prevent. And I think that this is underestimated, and this is also a big problem. And yes, I think that's it. Thank you.
David?
Yeah, okay, thanks for that. I'm doing quite a lot of talking, so apologies if anyone else is trying to get a word in. But yeah, we're covering a big area here. That's what's got to be recognised. But I think it is a big area because I think we're recognising the value of rural education or rural practice in the education of medical students. There's a couple of things. I mean, I think the whole thing about recognising health as opposed to disease and the kind of the contributing factors to health, and the public health aspects, yeah, absolutely essential. I was speaking to Professor Cotton, who Glasgow, and medical dean, in fact, the dean of the Rwandan University, and it's fascinating to compare the approach of medicine in Scotland and the UK versus the international stage and what's important. And I think often it's our international colleagues who actually remind us very well of the benefits of looking at kind of the how we appreciate and don't forget the value of good public health messages. And sometimes when we've kind of gone so far down that route and we've had big successes, for example, with vaccination programs, we sometimes get a bit kind of blasé about the real sort of benefits of these sorts of programs. The other thing is just about, certainly in the UK, we have a big problem with rising levels of complexity and the ageing population, and because we are a generalist kind of setting, that's my phone just gone, so I'm going to have to disappear for 2 seconds. But it's just to mention that rural practice has a huge amount. We need to be really careful about sending out the message that we think that rural is better than urban, or that general practice is better than specialisation. And we can work very, very well together. And I think this kind of debate is about the role that rural practice has to play in general kind of education. But I'll bow out just now for 2 seconds. Okay.
Okay, that's fine. Josuke would like to go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's also a very valid point raised. Me coming from Europe, where we don't see rural health as something of a priority or something that's even important, we see Europe more as being very urban than being very rural, which is something that has been changing lately, and we are starting to realize the importance of rural health and then the extent of rural population that we have here in Europe. So you ask what can we do to make medical students more interested in practicing in rural health and offering them some experience to rural health. I think as medical students we can do a lot in that to help that issue. So many researchers, mainly in Australia, have proven that early exposure to rural medicine and to rural setting is actually prone to have people that will be more interested in practicing in rural health later on. So if we expose our students early to rural setting, they will be more likely to go and practice in rural areas after they finish, and they'll be aware of the importance of rural health in a general way. So one good thing that IFMSA's many national member organizations are doing, they are organizing some kind of activities in regards to rural health. So I just want to give you a couple of really good examples. One of them is from Morocco, which is a North African country, where they have medical caravans, where their students go alongside with physicians to rural areas, and they offer medical help to people, basic examination. It's basically very good because rural population is getting much needed healthcare because they have a lack of healthcare in that manner. But it's also very important because medical students are getting rural exposure. To give you a European example, we have Germany, which they have a program where medical students from all over the Germany have a chance to go into a rural setting and stay with rural physicians for a month, which is not a long time when you look at the complete sphere of things. It's a very short time, 1 month. However, it's better than nothing, and it's a really good start. And many of our other member organizations actually have rural outreach programs where they go to rural areas and offer some basic medical screening, such as blood pressure measuring or glucose in blood measuring, which is important, I think, not just because those populations don't have access to that kind of services, but also because medical students, in a way, are developing sense that rural health is important, and they are seeing the disparities between rural and urban health. When you work or when you study in an urban area, it's very easy to get caught up in urban problems because you also have a lot of patients. There are also a lot of problems. So until you actually see patients in rural areas or problems that people in rural areas are facing, they are easily overlooked. So it's from that side, it's important for medical students to see a rural population and rural population problems, so they can maybe even advocate for the better healthcare in rural areas later on.
Amber would like to comment, and we have Sophie as well, who would like to comment before. I would like to comment as well, but I will let her comment.
So, do you want to comment first?
Yeah, go ahead, Amber.
Okay. What I was going to say was about getting medical students to promote getting into rural practice. I think, well, at least from the experience I've had at Swansea University, that hasn't been very successful. And I'm sure Sophie can testify to this as well. The students who are on our rural track would have sort of done the work that they're doing now anyway. For example, like I have my interest in family medicine for the Virgin Islands, so I would have sought out family practices that were in really challenging environments anyway. Sophie has her interest in tropical medicine, so she would have done that anyway. I think getting students exposed to rural medicine is important because then they understand that it's not all hospital based. So whenever they're interacting with family practitioners who do live in rural settings, they can understand the challenges that they're facing and the sort of requests that they make and how it fits around their patient. But I think rural practice is something either you love it or you hate it. There have been some of my classmates who ended up on a rural track and had a great experience and still not liked it, and they've had some who've been in like not so great a place and absolutely loved it. So I'm not sure what we could do aside from, providing the option. I totally think that we should definitely make the option available. But as far as recruiting people, I think either they'll want to do it or they won't want to do it. There's nothing much you could do about that. And that's strongly influenced a lot by people's background anyway. So I grew up in a very small island, a very community-oriented area where everyone knew each other. But we did have issues getting access to healthcare because the country is made up of 4 islands that you can only get to by boat or airplane. So having that background, that's what fueled my interest in rural medicine, and then I furthered that coming to Swansea University. I think if I'd grown up someplace like London, maybe I wouldn't have had as much interest in it and probably would not have liked rural medicine, and possibly might not have even ended up in Swansea. So yeah, I think having the option available is good, but I don't think that we can motivate people who don't have an interest in the first place to do rural medicine.
Sophie, would like to comment?
I think Swansea is quite good in the fact that it's got a rural and remote health track that students who are interested in the subject can apply for. So then we can actually ask the coordinator to go to specific areas that are more rural. They also have the general track, and they do send students out on rural placements. So even though we're urban-based, quite a lot of our year have had experience going to places like Aberystwyth or Bangor, which are more remote and rural. So in a way, it caters for the 2 people, those that are interested in rural medicine, and then those who have the option of choosing it. So I think Swansea's done quite well. I think, Amber, if you would agree, they've done quite well trying to cater for everyone and not force rural medicine on people. And I think it's actually worked out really well because a lot of people, as Amber said, have been sent out to these rural places, didn't enjoy it, or others have, and have been quite surprised now thinking about going into rural medicine. The second point is that Swansea University was created to basically improve the number of doctors within Wales because there was a shortage, particularly GPs. And so there's a lot of GP influence in our training, and therefore we get sent out to rural places, and we have a lot of influence about clinical skills and things that would benefit rural medicine. I think that's what I have to say.
Veronica?
I would just like to share my perspective from a family medicine trainee point of view. So here in Croatia, like in most places, we don't really have much of an elective in rural areas or anything like that, or much of a focus on rural medicine at all. But afterwards, when I got my training program, I got my training program for a county that is mostly rural. But because they don't have mentors for that county, I had to find a mentor for my program in the city. So basically, after not having any rural exposure during medical school, I continued not to have rural exposure during the training program because my mentor was city-based and my hospital portion of the training program is, of course, city-based. So after finishing my training program, I will again be in the position that I did not have rural experience. And I think this is also a problem, that after finishing your specialization, you still feel like you're not prepared for a rural area. And I think that we should think about how we could address that issue and how we could get more doctors to mentor in more rural areas of the country.
Do you have anything from Twitter, Veronica, also?
I haven't seen anything. Just a sec. No, I'll let you know.
Okay. Just to comment in what Yozo said before, I think it's really important that we have exposure to rural, but I don't think that caravans is the right exposure for rural. And I'm very categorical with this because we have Brazil, it's a third world country, and people love to come here and do something for just a few weeks and then come back and leave the population without any existence. So we don't need it anymore as a third world countries or undeveloped countries. We need people that will come and stay. And I think the best exposure is that the student could experience, live with a GP or a GP experience. Coming for just stay for and do anything that exempt people for just one time and then let them where they are and doing caravans style, I think it's not a good way to give exposure for students. I think it's a way that just we don't caring about the community that is there, that the context of is there. I don't think that the caravans exposure it's a good way. I don't think you like to answer me or give another comment on, or if anyone would like to comment on this part or agree or disagree. But yeah, Dave as well. So I don't think that like exposure in caravans or in punctual activities will give good experience for students, or even what is a good generalist or a good primary practice. So David, yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to agree with that. I mean, I think that we do need to be careful who we're attracting into rural practice as a career. There's kind of two things going on here. One is to appreciate rural health as an overall national delivery of health, whether you've got a national health service or not, but an appreciation of the demands of rural health is just as important as understanding what it is to deliver health to a deprived community or indeed an affluent community, and to have that kind of perspective, because ultimately it's that perspective that all work together, whichever specialty we're in, whether it's you're a consultant neurologist or a new surgeon in a big tertiary unit or a general practitioner in a rural area on call for a whole island. I mean, we've had interesting things here that, I mean, for example, we are quite happy to take applications for electives here on Arran, but we can really only offer about 4 or 5 over any particular summer. In last year, it's a depressing fact, but I have had to turn down over 96 applications from students writing to us in Arran saying, can we come to do our student electives? And the other thing that we've noticed is that there's some universities who seem to have turned the GP placement into a chance to do the elective. And the cynical part of me thinks that that's a way to get GP placement on the cheap, because they say, yeah, okay, this is your elective, it's up to you to sort it out and to fund it, and you need to find some nice friendly GPs who will know cost. So to answer your question about how we do smooth that kind of these kind of conflicts of demand and supply, I think ultimately this comes down to policy. It comes down to government saying we need to rural-proof our policies, be it in health, be it all sorts of areas, including connectivity, which is a big area, to making sure that internet and phone signals and the policies in that way are rural-proofed as well. But I think ultimately we need government policy to reflect what the country actually needs. And ultimately, we need to have supported medical student placements, which are available to those who want to go out. There's no shortage of medical students who do fancy the idea of going out, almost like a holiday. There's some really nice, stunning locations that they can go out as part of the placements, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think it was Sophie who was making the point that it's important not to shoehorn people who just do not want that kind of experience as part of their medical education, especially when increasingly they are paying for it themselves. It's important not to kind of say that people have to go through it as if it's some kind of ordeal. There's so much that rural practice can offer, and I think that we should be encouraging people to sample it on the strengths of those attractions, and not through shoehorning people into you must experience rural practice as part of your medical education. So yeah, it has to come from the top, has to be resourced, has to be a part of a wider kind of national strategy for health, whichever country we're in. Yeah, we also need to be a bit more savvy about if we're wanting to turn these people or these students to turn into budding rural practitioners. There's a little bit about how we sort out is quite serious considering this as a career, or who's serious about seeing the benefits of rural practice as part of their medical education versus those who might just be out to have a wee look. And I'm not at all saying that's a wrong thing, but there is an interesting piece of work around that, I think.
Anyone would like to talk? Maybe. Okay.
I think.
Yeah. If I can.
No.
If I can add something also. I think there's two things that also need to happen. One is also a sort of changing culture in medical schools, because as some of you already mentioned, a lot of medical schools are very university based, and within these settings it's sometimes made seen as if the rarest diseases in the highest specialized type of areas are so much more important than actually the challenges that a lot of people are facing. In some areas, by focusing so much on the academic side, the community is sort of forgotten. That's why since the 1980s, when you look at the more traditional model of spices, we're moving from hospital-based more towards community-based in general. But when you're also talking about finding more students that will actually end up really working in rural areas and not going just temporarily and learning from it and then going away again, something you can also look at is how students are selected before they go into medical schools. Because, for example, as Amber mentioned, if you come from a certain background, then chances that you're going to go back to that certain background are higher than if you're coming from an urban background to go actually to a rural area. But sometimes access to medical education or education in general is lower. So it's also one of the things that when we look at how do we actually recruit medical students, do we actually base it on certain competencies, or do we actually make sure that these medical students are coming from areas where they might actually go back and actually do something good? And the other thing when we're talking about culture is sometimes also universities actually recognizing the added value of students that are actually doing work in rural areas. For example, in some countries, if you have done, let's say, you've worked with a general practitioner in a rural area for 6 months because you had a certain project that you were running, or you were just walking in their shoes. There's quite a number of countries that really don't really care about what students do through non-formal education, especially when you look at the EMR region, where there is also a number of countries that really do support their students in taking on these initiatives and actually learning what they're not learning in their curriculum. And that's also sort of a mindset change as well that we're aiming for.
We have Yozo and then Sophie. Is that Yozo?
Yeah. Thank you. I would definitely agree with you that caravans in this case aren't a very good long-term solution. But seeing that in some countries they don't have rural GPs for students to be placed in, I think it's a very good good way for students to at least get some exposure. And just to clarify, it isn't just foreign people coming there to the country. It's run by medical students from that country. So basically, for the population of that country as well. I would also agree with Steve that students from rural background are of course more likely to practice in rural areas. In US, they had a really good programs in some schools, not specifically for students with rural background, but for students of Native American background, where they would get some placement in medical schools, and they tested out if these students would be more likely to go and practice in their communities after graduating, which proven to be correctly, meaning that if you have some exposure, as you said, that you will be likely to practice in that area. So I think I also agree that we shouldn't force by hook or crook students practicing in rural areas. However, you will see that in many countries and in many medical schools, there are not even a choice if you want to practice or not. And even if you have a will to practice, you don't have a way to do it. So I think it's very important to offer people a choice to go or to offer them electives or any kind of projects to have some rural exposure. And just to share a personal experience, I wasn't forced into having rural experience. However, I never considered rural health until I had rural exposure in that way. So basically, I started medical school thinking only about very clinical work, and this is something that attracted me from the start. However, after being exposed to some rural setting and to some rural health problems, I got more interested in this topic. So I think it's very important to give people the choice and to promote it as a very good learning experience, but also very enjoyable learning experience, because I think there's a very enjoyable part of practicing in rural health despite all the challenges and difficulties. So I think this is also very important when approaching medical students going into rural areas.
Sophie would like to comment.
I just wanted to respond to Steve's proposal about whether medical students should be selected based on where they come from. So, for instance, the more rural students will more likely go back and practice in rural areas. I just think that could potentially be quite a dangerous route to go down, because, as we all know, lots of students decide they might want to be an orthopaedic surgeon and end up being a GP or vice versa. So, in fact, that selection process could backfire majorly. And I think that's highlighted by yours' personal experience of him never actually thinking about rural medicine until he actually experienced it, and therefore he's changed his idea of what he wanted to do. So I just think that we should leave the application process as it is. So basically, students are chosen on their qualities will make them a good doctor rather than where they've come from and how that will then feed back to the communities later in life.
Okay, I would like to do some comments about our Brazilian reality, because I believe that here in Brazil we have some specific situations. Talking about the rural background, in my case, I was born in an urban area, but here in Brazil we have this specific problem about violence. And I don't know about Mayara and her experience, but here in Porto Alegre, which is my city, it's a big city, we have 1.5 million inhabitants, and I have heard a lot of people saying that they want to run away from the violence and they want to go to the rural area, trying to have some safety there. And that's my case, actually. I would like to go to some rural areas to have more safety and to feel safe and have a quality of life, maybe, looking for it. And the other specific situation that we have in Brazil is about what Sophie was talking about right now, about selecting people, and the others talked about about it as well. Here in Brazil, we have different selecting students. We have a test, a theoretical test. And usually we don't have interviews or something like that. And I have done a student exchange to UK, and I heard about some interviews and this kind of selecting students that is much more interesting in my opinion. And so here in Brazil, if you wanted to have this background to be analyzed, I believe, I don't know, what do you think, Mayara, but in my opinion this would be maybe impossible. It would be really interesting because maybe it would increase the number of students interested in rural areas, but I don't think that it would be something that could really happen. And the last comment I would like to say is that it's really sad that we don't have Sarah here, because she has lots of experience in this area. And in one previous rural cafe, she spoke about her university and how students can have some experience along 1 and 2 years in rural areas, and she maybe could speak a little bit more about it, but she's not here, so that's it.
Veronica?
Okay, I would also like to reflect on the comment about how we select students to go into medical school. I think it's important that we remember that the reality of rural communities is often that they are greatly disadvantaged in many countries in regards to schooling, in regards to the financial situation of their family to support them through something like medical school. And in Croatia, I know that the schooling system is in essence the same everywhere, but that's just not the reality. When you go into a school, you have a different quality of teachers, you have a different amount of opportunities, and not everyone can be sent to high school, let alone university, and this is already limiting the kind of people that we get into medical school. And then we are left with more privileged students, mainly, often mostly coming from urban areas, who are then deciding whether they want to or don't want to go into rural health. And this is why it's often talked about how it's important that we get students from rural areas, because they know what it's like in their community and the difficulties that their community faces, and they are more motivated to help their community. So I just wanted to say that, that's all.
Yeah, I think I was going to go after Veronica there. Just a couple of things to kind of pick up from our side of things. I think that, yeah, we don't want to get to the stage that we are applying such positive discrimination to students with a rural background that we actually place far too much expectation on them to then follow rural careers. And also, I totally agree, we need to kind of keep that balance that students are selected for medical school on the basis of merit and ability. And I think that it's very tricky and it's very difficult to expect universities to veer off that too much as well, because they are literally swamped with applications. Certainly here in the UK, that's a situation. The flip side is that the World Health Organization official report about 5 or 6 years ago, possibly a bit more, into recruitment and retention into rural areas, it's very clear. We have an evidence base that says if you come from a rural area that you are more likely to end up practicing in a rural area. So I think we have to take that into account, but we need to kind of just balance that out with the fact that, you know, I'm someone else. I grew up in Edinburgh, so I'm really kind of from a city, and my eyes were open to rural practice through a student education. So to basically try and kind of get through what I'm trying to say. So I think that it really highlights the importance of looking at rural recruitment, if that's what we're focusing on, as a pipeline. There's various inspirational leaders in specialties of their own, but we need to be aware that there's several kind of key stages in the life cycle of a typical rural GP. We want to use positive discrimination to smooth out inequalities, particularly inequalities of access to education. So absolutely, in rural areas, if you don't have access to the same education that will give you the 5 A's or the 4 A's and a B to get into medical school, I think there's nothing wrong with using positive discrimination to smooth out that inequality and say, look, if you didn't have a physics teacher, or you know that the one physics teacher in the school went off and you weren't able to get an appropriate grading that would help you to get into medical school, well, we can see about smoothing that off compared with the access to bigger schools in urban areas, where if one physics teacher leaves, well, there's another 4 or 5 who can then pick up that kind of workload. But I think that, you know, focusing on the pipeline kind of approach is really important. But then recognizing that the next part of that is when people leave university, based on their undergraduate experiences, they will then start to make some career choices. And people at that stage, I think it's less helpful to focus on their backgrounds at that point. It's more about saying, well, at that point, who is interested in going into rural practice or following a kind of a rural career, and then supporting them to the best of our ability to then help kind of support them into these areas. There's some very real kind of barriers, you know, even in terms of expenses allowed during kind of training years. If you don't have to fund a kind of two kind of places to stay between somewhere in the city and additional kind of rural placements, you're not having to fund the extra fuel costs involved in training in a rural area, and generally there's a kind of higher basic cost of living. We need to you know, smooth these things out and make sure that people who want to kind of practice and develop good medicine don't have to worry about these additional kind of hurdles. So again, I come back to this pipeline approach. I think the pipeline approach is very good at analogizing that kind of life cycle, that we should really be a lot more clever and a lot more sympathetic to people who have that aspiration.
Okay, I just wanted to pick up on what you were saying about recruiting people from areas who may not necessarily have had the best education, because I mean, I'm coming from the Caribbean, and I went to a public high school, and my parents made it very clear that either you work hard or you don't get what it is that you want. So yes, I think it is important that you take that into consideration, but at the same time, people who grow up in areas that aren't that affluent will always have those challenges in their life. And if you don't prove that you can overcome them and not use your background as an excuse to be subpar, I think that it's you just won't be good enough. So as Sophie was saying, when people, look at their application for medical school, you still need to show those qualities, that you have a fighting spirit, that you can overcome all the adversity that you've had, that you're willing to, not make excuses. And yes, you do have to work harder than probably everyone else, but you do still have to meet, the standard that has been set. One thing I always find quite frustrating is when people who are coming from my country who would like to apply to medical school in the UK, and I try to explain to them that it is probably the hardest thing you'll ever have to do. It's harder than anything that you did back home. Even though you thought you were at the top of the class back home, it doesn't matter when you go into this arena. And it is unfair, but it is reality as well. So I think when you're trying to recruit medical students, regardless of whether they want to go into an urban or rural setting, who come from a rural background, you do need to make them aware that you're not going to skim through medical school to end up back where you were at the start. You do need to prove that you can accept the challenges of medical school, of medical education, as well as medical practice.
Okay. I would like to just comment, and I just would like to ask if Louise would like to say anything, because you are in silence after me, so just think about it. Yeah. I would like just to comment that I agree that to have a chance of a good exposure is one of the best ways, and also I think it's really good if we think that also people from urban area could have the chance to go to become rural, and even rural could be urban, and it's you can do the people, it's free to choose it. But I think our medical education is much more urban oriented. I never listened before I went to Ireland in my 5th year of medical course about the rural medicine. I never listened about it before. I have an idea of remote areas, but I didn't have any idea of that. And I think also the part of the free of choice, and also about caravans and other things. I wouldn't like to be boring about that, but I think it's usually good for students. Like, we have these kind of things that is started from students here, but it's proved that for communities isn't good at all. So I think we need to just think about it and what is better for the community. I just checked that they need to go. I'm not sure if he would like to say bye, or he's just writing bye, so that's fine. Thank you, David, for your participation. And so just to do these both comments, Louise, would you like to talk?
Yes, the reason that I'm strangely quiet today is because I feel like an outsider in this conversation. So I did my medical course in a faculty that is hospital-based, and I'm a city boy. But when I heard Amber talking about how her rural background influenced her choice, I was thinking that for me is quite the opposite. So I always lived in the city, but rural here is very attractive to me, and this is because rural medicine has so much to offer, so much benefits that we can enjoy. And I really think that what we are missing here in terms of medical education is properly market what rural medicine has to offer. And this should be done in medical faculty, of course, through optionals, through electives, as you mentioned. But perhaps not only that, perhaps it should be also at least in part, mandatory, because we are not allowed to choose if we are going to the internal medicine rotation. So why would we choose not to go to the rural medicine course as well? So I think it should not be only optional, so perhaps a part of it should be mandatory as well. So for you to experiment, to experience rural medicine during the medical course. And when you go to the residency, then the problem also exists there. Because, for instance, in Portugal, the residency program, well, you can choose where you do your residency, but either you stay in a rural setting and you'll stay there like for the entire run of the residency program, or you go to a city-based program, and then you have no exposure to rural medicine, into rural settings. So I think the problem also lies on the residency program, and there it would be important for the possibility to exist to go to a rural outpost and do part of your program there as well.
Okay. I would like just to do a quick comment. It's a page that David just went, because sometimes we also need to do rural attractive. And they've made an Iran kind of movie that's kind of 007 thing, and then I used it to show to some people, and that they get really interested in rural just because of the sound part and making it exciting as well. So just sometimes to start a conversation is also important to make it interesting. Veronica would like to talk, and anyone would like to talk, please say if you don't. Veronica?
Yeah, I'd like to just kind of join on to what Luis was saying. So in the residency program, it is a matter of also not excluding your kind of need to also be in an urban setting to know how things work there, and how things are run in a hospital, and where you're sending your patients, and what you can expect from the doctors in the hospital, so that you could explain all of these things to your patient when they ask you their questions. And also, I just wanted to say that I think it might be a matter of just medicine being such a large and broad subject that medical school lasts for 6 years in most places. And in those 6 years, the professors are doing their best to fit in all of that information. And it would be great if we could have half a year in rural medicine, but we can't substitute some other area of medicine so that we can have a rural period. And if we want to have that kind of period, maybe there needs to be different medical tracks. Maybe there needs to be a general program in medicine, and at some point you can decide if you want to be more hospital-based or more primary care rural-based, or something like that, but that's going to require a complete change in how we do things. So for now, maybe having rural electives is the best option for most places. And how we do that after medical school, how we look at residencies and how we prepare our family medicine residents for going into rural areas, and whether they can also choose at the beginning or change their mind halfway through training, that's also another big question, because we don't want to limit people's decisions and options for work. And I think that opens lots and lots of questions at all different stages of medical education.
Okay. Anyone would like to talk?
Yeah, just a quick follow-up on that. I guess that we really need to discuss, to rethink the faculties, the medical education itself. And the reason why I say this is because if we come to think about it, then the pyramid is actually reversed. So most physicians will end up being in community settings, and many of them in rural settings. So if medical education is hospital based, then the pyramid is upside down. You know what I mean? So perhaps we truly need to rethink how medical education is conceived and how it is run nowadays.
Yeah, thank you. And also, if you need more now in rural, also I think like it needs to be longitudinal. The learning into rural, like you need to have that on first year, even if it's just classes, and then on second year, and it need to be something that people knew about it, because if I didn't get interested by it, I never knew anything. Anyone would like to talk? I think, yeah, go ahead, Yosu.
Yeah, I think I agree with Veronica. I think it's a very big problem to include everything that we need in medical school, because then medical schools would last for 20 years. But I also think that it's really good to have a good overview of everything. So yes, of course, there is no real alternative to people being in rural areas and experiencing rural medicine as that. But you'll see that even in primary health setting, like when you're doing your GP rotation, in the lectures there will be only a small portion of those lectures, or none at all, offered to tell you about rural health and rural health problems. So if we include everything that should be included in medical school, definitely that wouldn't be possible at all. But it's very important to raise awareness in medical students community about rural health, and that there is a problem in regards to healthcare in rural areas. So yeah, it's not an alternative to rural practice and practicing in rural setting or having a rural vocation, but it's a very important step toward changing the mindset of the people and of medical students about the importance and needs of rural population in that way.
Amber.
So just to touch on what everyone is saying about medical education, so Swansea University is an accelerated graduate entry course. So our medical school is actually, well, it's 4 years, but in reality it's actually 3.5, because we do our finals shortly after Christmas in our final year. The way that they somehow managed to cram everything in is we have what's called a spiral curriculum. So we have very early exposure to general practice. We have 1 day sort of every other week in our first year and our second year, and then blocks of 3 weeks in third and fourth year. We also have specialty attachment, which is 5-week blocks and everything, including emergency medicine, surgery, psychiatry, etc. And the whole aim of this is to kind of mimic what it's like to be a doctor. So every week we have a very different disease, and it's not always, it doesn't always follow a pattern. So for example, in our first year, we started off with diarrhea, and then the next week was suicide, and then after that was something else completely different, which has been a challenge. But the good thing about it is that you get very early exposure, and you kind of, by the time you get to your third year, things are sort of slotting into place. And one thing I really liked about it was that being on the rural track, I got experience in a rural setting from my first year, because my general practice was in a rural setting. So I had to deal with challenges such as commuting, finding out where a patient lived, because a lot of them lived in farming areas, trying to get them to come to an appointment because they can't, because they're raising their sheep or they're milking cows or whatever they do during the day. So I thought it was quite beneficial, and I think, as Sophie was saying, I think Swansea really has got it right in terms of designing our medical education to fit in all of our core skills and also all of the basic science that we need to get in. And additionally, we also have exposure to clinical practice, and it can be either rural or urban setting, but the focus for me on the rural track has been mainly in the rural setting, but obviously the specialty attachments have been in hospital, so I've kind of gotten the best of both worlds.
Also, yeah, I agree with you, Amber, and I just would like to say, like 75% of the poor live in rural area. So we need to if we don't get rural oriented on our graduation, we will not easily get, because usually who has chance to get to study is who is not in the poor line. So if 75% of the whole world population is in the rural areas, we need to think in a way to address it. So, and I think that we can have like generalist and clinical work into rural areas without any trouble. I would like to ask if anyone would like to comment. Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I would actually agree with Louis, and I wanted to slightly touch on how different things are taught. So not only using this fiber curriculum method, but for example, if we're talking about education on, let's say, social determinants of health or global health education, there's a very big difference between saying, well, we want you as medical students to know about what health is, not just what is a disease, but what is all of the things that touch health, and saying, okay, well, you're now going to get a 6-week course on social determinants of health, which gives a very different kind of impression to a student than if you have an integrated approach, when throughout everything that you learn, you take into account what are the social factors influencing health. So within an integrated approach, you don't only look at, well, now we're learning 6 weeks about social determinants, now we're learning 6 weeks about cardiology, now we're learning 6 weeks about something else. But when you're looking at a disease, you're actually looking more at a patient and then zooming out. Okay, well, how do we treat this patient? How do we treat this patient if we don't have these and these diagnostic methods? What are the kind of influences that a patient's environment can have on them? And doing that throughout the course to sort of change medical students' mindsets, to also take into account the situation that patients live in, instead of delivering it in a sort of, well, now you have 6 weeks of this elective, and now this is everything that you actually need to know about this topic.
Sure, I agree with you, Steve. Anyone would like to talk? We are almost in the closing part. So I would like to know if anyone would like to do final considerations before you say bye. And I would like to ask also, as a medical student, what we can do to make our colleagues more aware, or make other universities or other countries about rural education, if anyone have a good insight on it, like how we can advocate for rural in our world now. So, and if you also would like to talk, and if you could close also, I know that's hard, but
I would like to cut in with a very personal experience and how I got involved in rural health, and I think that's a very good example of what medical students can do for other medical students when it comes to rural health. So in my second year of medical school, I got offered to go for a rural health project organized by students, and it wasn't in a very remote setting. It was set in a rural town, and it was basically offering basic health promotion to people, measuring the blood pressure or glucose in the blood. Which was very interesting for me, because I was a second-year medical student in a school that doesn't offer a lot of practical things during preclinical years. So from that side, it was very interesting for me. But also, what got me involved wasn't the fact that it was going to be in a rural health, in rural setting, but what got me interested at the way it was promoted. It was promoted as 4 days of having fun and going with the other medical students on a trip. And maybe if it wasn't promoted like that, I would never go. However, I did went, and I really liked it. I really enjoyed it, and I became aware of the needs of rural population and the problems that practicing in rural settings is actually presenting. So I think from that side, it's really important to promote rural health to medical students as something interesting. and then have them advocate with other medical students. And what I saw when I took over organizing this project, that people participating would go back to school and speak with their colleagues, other medical students, saying, oh, we had such a good time, we learned this, we learned that, but we also faced some difficulties. We saw how people are practicing there. So I think medical students, just to close up, play a very important and crucial role in advocating for oral health, not just within themselves, but also towards their medical faculty. So, for example, if you ask for a oral health setting, and if you ask continuously, I'm sure that medical school will try to provide it with the experience that you need. But also, I think medical students play a very important role in closing the gap. And whereas where medical schools maybe don't offer any role setting or any role projects, medical students can play a very important role and offer this to their colleagues and fellow medical students.
Anyone would like to talk after Yozu? Okay, yeah, go ahead, Veronica, and please close.
Okay, I would just like to say that I agree with Yoza on the subject that people should constantly ask for things, and I think that that should continue through all levels of education. So students should ask for placements, and we as trainees should ask for there to be mentors in rural areas. And because medicine is a profession where you're continuously learning and educating yourself, we should ask for these things to be made available so that we can develop the specific skills that we think we need in a specific job that we are doing, be it rural or any other job in medicine. So I think that that's an important point. And I'd just like to close with, as long as there's people like the people here motivated enough to talk about it and get the questions out there, I think that there will be improvements. They might be slow, but we'll get there.
That's fine. Maybe Steve would like to close.
Yeah, I was just going to say that it's really important for both medical students as well as medical schools to understand their social responsibility. And there's also a lot of key documents that have been assembled and consensus is made between us that we have a role towards society. And if we're not fulfilling it now in the way that we should be, and we are not training our students enough to actually be able to work in rural areas or actually serve rural communities with what they need, then we're doing something wrong. And medical students have a certain responsibility towards their future patients. And if they have a unique position of actually experiencing what education is that education planners don't have. So if you do not address these to your medical schools, saying we do not feel prepared. I think Veronica said that at one point, that we do not feel prepared. If you do not express these concerns, then they might not actually know what is lacking within the curriculum. And there's actually quite a lot of structures where students can actually raise their voice and are listened to. If they're not listened to, then they should create the movement within these faculties to actually advocate for what they feel is needed to be the best possible doctor that they can be.
Sophie would like to close.
Just want to say that I've really enjoyed this discussion. It's lovely to talk about rural medicine. I basically think, I'm just going to echo everyone, needs more advocacy, and I think the best way of doing it is really disseminating through the student population, so passing on your experiences in a positive way to the students and talking about it. It's going to be a slow process, but I think they just take time, and I think the more that people are aware of it, the more that people will want to participate in it.
Luis?
Yeah, I think with people like you interested in rural medicine. The future is bright, you know, with medical students like the ones we have here. I think social media, as always, can play a crucial role, because we now have the entire world at our hands with social media, so we can deliver this message in ways that we couldn't have done before. So I think this media is very important for this, for promoting this message and having others also talking about rural medicine.
Well, I completely agree with Luis. I really believe that social media can be a strong tool for us in advocating this rural medical education. I am really positive. I believe that we are going on the right track, and maybe slowly, as Veronica said, but while we are here and fighting for it, we are going to the right uh, into the right direction. I really would like to thank you all for your presence here. It was a really nice cafe, and yeah, that's it.
Yeah, repeating what everyone said, it's been a very interesting conversation. It's been very enlightening to hear other people's experiences of why they go into rural medicine and what their ideas are about rural medical education. And yeah, as Sophie said, we just need to keep, displaying the enjoyment that we get from rural health to our classmates, to our colleagues and our peers, and keep the movement going.
Sure. So thanks. I would like to thank you everybody for joining us today. It was just awesome to have more students and having other point of views. Also, I would like to invite everybody that is watching us to our next, and you all also, for our next cafe. It will be 7th of May, and it will be about women in rural areas. So I think it will be a great one, and just for women. I'm joking, but I think we have a lot of women joining us, and it's really interesting to have your point of views, and I think we need to advocate for it in social media and also in our universities. So I think we can keep going on Twitter and on Facebook, and is still making the contact and talking with each other and trying to construct a good world. So thank you, and I think it was a really good cafe. Bye.